The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
At a time when different groups are demanding equal rights and protection from predatory behavior, there's one group that's been excluded in the conversation: the rental property owner. And this couldn't be more true in Massachusetts, of all places. Today, we'll hear the story of Aletta Horton, a generous entrepreneur and small property owner who was forced to turn to eviction as a last resort when her tenants deliberately stopped paying the agreed-upon rent. What happened next will shock any fair-minded person, as Aletta was forced to confront a series of false accusations made by her tenants to prolong an already long eviction process and to possibly force Aletta herself into foreclosure. Attorney Jordana Greenman will describe how the legal process in Massachusetts failed to protect Aletta in a timely manner and how this failure threatens all property owners across Massachusetts. How can the so-called landlord combat the stereotype of being greedy in the rush towards eviction when the ones who are patient and generous, like Aletta, become the easiest prey the longer they wait to regain possession of their properties? Small business owners already provide the majority of rental housing in our Commonwealth. In order to create balance in our system, is it possible to save this endangered group before they go extinct? Hello, everyone. My name is Amir Shahsavari. I'm the Vice President of the Small Property Owners Association, also known as SPOA, which is happy to bring you episode 12 of SPOA Housing Policy Series. This is where we discuss property rights, housing policy, and all things real estate. I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Jordana Greenman. Jordana is an attorney who represents small property owners. This is her fourth time on the program. It's great to have you back, Jordana.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
And we have Miss Aletta Horton. Aletta is a small property owner from the Boston area. She is Jordana's client, and she's going to tell us her story today. It's wonderful to have you, Aletta. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
SPOA is committed to fighting for a fair and level playing field for both property owners, tenants, and all stakeholders in the realm of housing. And that's why it's important to tell stories like the one you're going to hear today, because it's not a level playing field as far as the property owner is concerned. Very rarely do we hear the property owner perspective and the difficulties that property owners face, especially when they're stuck in situations where they have no choice but to remove difficult, non-compliant, and professional tenants. With that, I just want to remind all of you to please donate to SPOA at spoa.com/join. Again, that's www.spoa.com/join. As a group of volunteers, we work hard to advocate for you at government hearings, putting out monthly newsletters of our own, bringing you this program, giving interviews to the print media and TV news stations. It's our pleasure to do it, but we can't do it without your help and without your donations. We've always been on top of housing policy proposals that are dangerous for tenants and owners alike. We've always brought you email updates, bringing you up to speed, encouraging you to contact your elected officials to voice your concerns about those policies. We will always be on top of it for you, but again, we need our members to be supportive and engaged. So please donate at spoa.com/join. And now I want to turn to Aletta. I was wondering if you could begin by telling us what motivated you to become a rental housing provider.
Well, I've been in real estate for over 25 years now in some capacity. I'm also a loan officer, and I'm from Boston, and my business is mainly based in Washington State, but with family in Boston, I decided to venture out. So this was my venturing into the Boston real estate market.
Well, congratulations for doing that. I mean, all of us, we provide a valuable service to deliver housing to people. A lot of us have businesses that happen to be female, minority, and family owned. I only mention that because there's this antiquated stereotype out there that we're just huge mega corporations, that we're not even human. But it's a sensitive ecosystem. You know, hardworking people like you who make yourselves available to your tenants, people who are engaged, people who are problem solvers, people who are generous. You know, many of us work hard to keep our rents affordable, especially when we have tenants with whom we have special relationships. There's a whole human angle to that that is very much underreported. So on behalf of everyone, thank you for becoming a rental housing provider. That's very important. And having said that, what happened most recently with the story you're going to tell us, the tenants that you got involved with? What was the scenario? I know that you were purchasing the property from them, and what happened from there?
Well, actually, I was purchasing the property from the bank,
Hmm.
and they were still occupying the property. And I actually made contact with them prior to purchasing the home, and it was agreed upon that I would sell them the home back. So we both felt like it was, God intervening that someone would come along and buy their home and give them an opportunity to purchase it back. So that was how it started. And it was so interesting because I had never met them. And I was in Boston, and my aunt and I were at Legal Seafoods. And I had only seen her and her husband in pictures and on Facebook. And we were waiting for our food, and I see this couple in line at Legal Seafoods, but she has very unique eyes, I think. And I walked up to her and I said, "Remove your mask." And she pulled it down. I said, "Are you Jamie Washington?" And we just embraced and we're like, "Oh my gosh." Because at that point we had only spoken on the phone. And so it started off in my mind as brother and sister in Christ and as a friendship even. So it was unfortunate the way it evolved into something very negative. Um, so yeah, they were going to buy the home back from me and then abruptly decided that they would not. And that's when the nightmare began.
Hmm. So they were going to buy the home back from you at some point, and in the meantime, you decided to rent it to them.
Correct.
Is that correct? I
Well,
see.
it
And
it 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 morphed into a rental because at that
mhm,
point they said, "Well, we don't want to buy it any longer, but we also don't want to move right now."
mhm,
Okay. Uh, and so we had a rent amount established while they were trying to purchase. And I was even working with their loan officer because I am also a loan officer.
mhm.
And so they decided one day we don't want to buy the house back. And I didn't hear from them for probably 3 months. Then they finally reached back out, sent me backdated rent that they had lowered from what we had originally agreed. And I'll just have to say, I was advised several times by different people, you better start this eviction now. And I did not because I really was hoping it didn't turn as contentious as it did. I didn't want them to have a second eviction on their record. So I was just trying to be merciful and hope they would come to themselves. At one point, I even offered them 25 grand to relocate, and they didn't want that.
Lita, that was very generous of you. It appears that they had also been involved in an eviction process previously. Is that correct?
They actually had been evicted and they were at the latter stage of that. And when I purchased the property, the timing was just so impeccable on their behalf because they had until August 31st to be out. And at that point, the bank could have obtained what is it called again, where you can actually put them out? What is that? The writ? Well, they were at that.
Execution.
Yes, so they were at that stage, and I closed on the property on October 14th. So, and also too, Boston had just put another moratorium on evictions because of COVID. So they were right at that stage of being evicted and put out when I purchased the home. So
I see. And when you purchased the home and when you were working with them because things were so friendly, you decided not to actually have a lease. Is that right?
There was no lease initially, correct. It was just, well, we just had talked about a certain amount. But then we were working on a lease, and Mrs. Washington, I began to see another side of her, and I thought she was being unreasonable beyond what she had already been. And I decided I didn't want to even do a lease. And so I was just really hoping that they would, say, you know what, we're going to move on this day, because I really did not want them to have a second eviction, because I know what that looks like. And I was, they have 5 children, so I was just trying to not be, I was hoping that they would move out on their own, and they just wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it.
I see. So, as far as the straw that broke the camel's back, how long did it take, or what happened when you finally said, you know what, I have to go to Jordana?
Well, they had lowered the rent down to $3,000 a month. And they stopped communicating, and just basically they made a decision that they were going to pay me what they wanted to pay me and not deal with me at all. And so I said, okay, this can't continue, because I'm losing money. Just, it was ridiculous. And so when I reached out to Jordana, bless her heart, she was like, "What? You haven't been done this? What are you waiting on?" And she warned me of all these scenarios, and I wanted to believe the best in them, but it just was not there. And the moment that she found the paperwork, all of a sudden now I'm getting calls from housing and code enforcement saying all these things are wrong with the house. And at this point, Amir, I had never even stepped foot in the house. I had never been in the home. My first time in the home was after we actually won the eviction. So they're accusing me of being a slum landlord. We're thinking, okay, you've been in this house since it was built, so anything wrong is because of you. And so it just went bad from there. The moment that they saw I was serious, and I'll just say I had an attorney prior to her, and he also wanted me to start, but again, no, 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 no. So Jordana finally said, you have to just do this. And then that's when they started saying that I didn't do this in the house, that there were constant plumbing issues. It was just a nightmare. They went and filed a false police report against me, accusing me of threatening to poison the paint because I had to paint in the home because of things that they had done. It was just horrific, horrific.
Well, I've heard Jordana say before, and others say before, that in many instances, the property owner wants to be nice and humane and flexible. And even though there are cases where it pays off, and, even though there are tenants that show appreciation and catch up, there are also a good number of tenants who don't.
Right.
Because they think, or they are told, that they can get away with doing so, unfortunately. And Jordana, I'll bring you into it. So Aletta came to you with her story, and you said, you know what, you can't afford to be nice anymore. You have
That's
to.
exactly what she said.
That's exactly what she said. So now it's time for you to get the process going. So what happened from there?
So, well, let me just back up for a second, because I met Aletta through a mutual friend, colleague, real estate agent, and she was refinancing kind of to shuffle up and try to afford to be able to keep these people there. So I think I probably had said at the time, like, whoa, do we really want to keep them there? But again, being somebody who was so generous and so I believe that the world is a good place, when you don't spend every week in Boston Housing Court, you have a lot more optimism than some other people. And but I said, okay, this is her choice. So we waited, and that's what I think that's what the most important thing for people to know is that we served the notice to quit in January of 2023. The case was entered on mass courts on March 13th, 2023. They demanded a jury trial and took us through the ringer. Eventually waived that. They hired a lawyer. Their lawyer fired them. we did not get to have our bench trial until February of 2024. And then the findings and rulings came out May 15th, 2024. Then she went to serve the 48-hour notice and do the levy on execution. They ran to the court, tried to file for an emergency order, lost. And the next day or a couple days later, finally, early June, she gets them out. So again, she buys this property, I believe, in October of 2022. And that's how long it took to deal with it. And the losses are so big, so big. The mortgage, while we were trying to evict them, became due. Because again, it's not an owner-occupied mortgage. It doesn't have the same type of flexibility with extensions and whatnot. And they were, you know, on her, like, this is over, we're calling the note. And it was down to the wire, literally down to the wire, where she could have lost the property herself had we not been able to push what we did. And she was so gracious the whole time, despite everything. It's so great because not all clients are like that. You know, it's hard because people can get very personal and, you know, they're losing everything. But Aletta the whole time was, you know, very gracious and remained very optimistic right down to the last minute, which was very impressive. And, you know, as having a real estate mind, I think she understood a little bit more than some people do. For example, when we went to do discovery, I didn't have to explain to her what is discovery and why am I doing this and all that. She kind of just did what I asked her to and got me the information that I needed to process the case. But talk about lying, cheating, and stealing. I mean, these people, the whole paint thing, they literally created a Gmail address, created one, sent an email to themselves, threatening to send poison paint or something. I can't remember exactly. And the judge was just not having it. It was unbelievable, the extent to which people will go when, as she said, they've been in the house from the beginning. Anything that they never asked her to do anything until the process started. And then they're calling ISD. I mean, they might as well be calling ISD on themselves because they still haven't even let her in. It was such a game. It was so foul. And, you know, to the fact that they hired a lawyer who then, for some reason, I mean, we don't get to know. That's private between the court and the lawyer, why she then got rid of them. And they went there on their own they even were told, you know, you can only submit documents up to 5 days before the trial. They marched in there after the trial, I think 3 days later, with a stack of 200 pages of paperwork, trying to get the court to address it. It wasn't even brought up in the trial.
So Jordana, when their attorney let them go, did they go what's called pro se at that point without representation, or did they get another attorney?
Yes, they did. I don't think they were able to find one. I think that they tried. I think that, and this is a problem for, you know, tenants of modest means, they cannot get legal services because they make too much money or they don't comply with the standards. They're not considered poverty level, so they couldn't get free lawyer. And I think just as it is for me, if somebody contacts me and they say, hey, I'm looking to jump ship for my lawyer, you say, well, what's wrong with you that this is why you want to do this? You hired this person, you trusted them, this is what's happening. And I mean, Aletta and I bumped heads a couple of times, of course, because we're both, you know, strong women in the business. But all in all, you know, we kept going and it was very straightforward, but it took forever because of the fact that Aletta filed what's called a no cause case. She just said, I just want the property back. Because at the time that we served them, they did not owe anything pursuant to what she and they had agreed that they would pay. So we couldn't serve them for non-payment of rent or any of that stuff. Also knowing that a non-payment case can end with payment. We think they probably had money that they just weren't giving her because they did stop paying after we started the case. We had to go through the use and occupancy hearing. They had to pay more than they had wanted to. every month, but they paid it faithfully. So that's why it took so long to get where we got. But meanwhile, what they were paying was, I think, less than half, if I'm right, Alita, of what the costs were for you. So
Correct.
all of that just kept stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. And
I
people
see.
think that people buy property and they become millionaires, but that's just not how it works. It's really not.
Right. And earlier, Alita, you were saying that you were not able to enter the property. I mean, the tenants had been there the whole time. If you had wanted to enter or send somebody else to enter on your behalf to check the plumbing or the paint or whatever else,
Mhm.
was that a possibility, or were the tenants shutting you out? Or did you feel
So,
unsafe doing that?
so my cousin, who was my first attorney on the case, he actually became pretty friendly with the husband.
Hmm.
And so he had been to the property more than once. I had not, and partially by choice, because it became difficult when somebody smiles in your face and then they're the total opposite. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So I just
Right.
didn't want to even see their faces, to be quite honest with you.
Hmm.
Um, the one time that I did go, you know, hi, Mrs. Horton, come in. I'm thinking to myself, this is not who you are. And so it became frustrating just how she would act one way, but her actions were the total opposite. Act really nice. I mean, she could fool the best of them. I mean, if I didn't know her, she could probably fool me again, but I had never entered. And the one time that I did, she was gracious and kind and showed me around the home. I mean, the home is amazing. I see why they didn't want to go, but it was just unfortunate because I gave them an opportunity to get a lump sum of cash and start fresh.
Hmm.
Why they wanted to fight tooth and nail down to the end for a property that they hadn't owned in years, I will never understand that,
Hmm.
because they eventually did leave, and I believe that they left like thieves in the night. They left all their children's beds, all kinds of personal effects. So I honestly believe that they didn't think they were going to have to go up until they came to themselves at the very last minute and said, "What are we doing?" Because when we got there, there was so much stuff left behind.
And so, Alita, if there was all that stuff left behind, it fell upon you to put all that stuff in storage and it cost you more money. Is that how it played out?
As smart as Mrs. Washington thinks she is, on that one, she miscalculated because I did have someone lined up and it was going to cost me $5,000 to store their things. But the day we went to go take possession, not only did they cut up all the blinds and have those outside on the lawn, but we go in and all the beds are there. And typically, when you get your property back, you go in and you secure the locks and you leave. Well, because all those nice beds were there, I went and bought some sheets and things, and I said, I'm going to spend the night in my house. And that night, I thought I saw Mr. Washington's car drive by. Was that Mr. Washington's car? So I'd seen their car once in the garage when I entered the home. So I go in the house and I could see that same vehicle. So I ran, turned all the lights off, and I stood behind a wall in the dining room. And Mr. Washington comes walking by the property on his cell phone. And as I'm standing there, I know it was the Holy Spirit. Check the windows. He sees my rental truck, so he doesn't know who's there, but he sees that somebody's in the house. He walks by the property, then he walks back to his vehicle and leaves. And Amir, I check a window, it's open. I check another one, it's open. They had planned on coming back, I believe, and retrieving the rest of their belongings because almost all of the downstairs windows were unlocked. So that's why they didn't have me store, because they had planned on going back to get their things. But at that, because they had actually told my cousin that all of that was trash. I mean, these were like brand new beds in the house. They left 5 beds, 4 nice twin beds. It was really unfortunate because I would love to have said, come and get your things. I didn't want it to end like that. you know, but that's the choice that they made. And it was ironic because they didn't think things through. They reached out to my cousin and they didn't dare call me and asked if they could come by and pick up their mail. Oh, and you have the nerve to ask to come pick up your mail? Well, if they had asked me, there was a small chance I would have said yes, but they asked my cousin. And my cousin said, well, unfortunately, we have changed the mailbox, told the mailman that you no longer live here, and there are new tenants already in the home. It was actually my parents. They were in Boston for a whole month. So it was unfortunate because it didn't have to be that way, Amir. I would love to say, come and get your children's beds, come and get your children's baby pictures. Come, and I actually reached out. I sent her a picture. I said, Jamie, do you want your children's baby pictures? Do you want I'll put them in the mail for you. No response. No response.
That is odd. It's creepy. It sounds like trespassing, you know, if you ask me.
I
I mean,
immediately actually emailed her. I said, I see your husband lurking around the property. I have alerted the authorities. And he scurried off, and I didn't see him anymore after that. But I
yeah.
think their plan was to go back into the home, Amir. I really do.
Well, I'm glad that it didn't turn into something ugly. I know it was frightening, but I'm glad it didn't get worse than that.
Right.
Jordana, earlier you were saying that if it had been a non-payment case, the tenants would have had the right to cure. And if they did, then they could have canceled the eviction. And of course, you could stomach a scenario like that for tenants who mean well, who are trying to catch up, you know, people of good faith who are trying to catch up. But these are the sort of tenants whom you would not want to have around, even if they did cure what they owed.
Correct.
And so, can you tell us a little bit more about how that whole process plays out? I mean, the advantages versus the disadvantages of filing a case one way or another, as far as getting possession back in the smoothest way possible.
Unfortunately, what you would think would be getting possession back in the smoothest way possible would be a no-fault case. You're saying, hey, look, I just want my property. That should be fine. It ends up being the most contentious and the most difficult because of what they call the $1 rule. So if the tenants can prove that you owe them as much as $1, and people say, oh, I don't owe them any money. Well, yeah, you say you don't owe them any money, but if there's a crack in the window, if there's a tiny hole in the floor, no matter whose fault it is, no matter who did what, you're responsible for that. It becomes another problem. So that's a huge issue that I don't know how Massachusetts will ever. I don't know if it will ever. I kind of doubt it. Unfortunately, for small property owners, I really do kind of doubt it. But that creates such a hectic situation. And if you've done something like violated the security deposit law or really anything that would be, oh, I don't know, human to do. If you went to the property because you were in the neighborhood one day, but you didn't give them 24-hour notice, that could be an issue. It's completely unreal what can happen and what does happen. It's similar with a non-payment case. And unfortunately, the best type of case is what's called a fault case. And that is where you can prove that the tenant did something wrong, did something to violate the lease. It's not that easy, but it is possible, and it is your best bet because what the tenants can bring up as defenses does not include the conditions of the property where the tenant has done something wrong. They can say it's retaliation, they can say it's discrimination, and everybody almost always does. So it's interesting how everybody discriminates and everybody is, doing something wrong. But
well, you brought up retaliation, and I know that was a central piece of the tenant's argument. So either one of you can take it from here. How did that enter into the story?
How did what enter into the story?
The point at which the tenants started accusing Aletta of retaliation when she went forward with eviction proceedings.
I believe it was in their answer.
Right from the get-go?
Yeah.
And
Bad
what
conditions, retaliation, discrimination, because tenants are provided with a form um, that you can check boxes on. And
Actually,
all you have to,
their first one actually was quiet enjoyment and something else. They didn't bring up any repair issues until after. Initially, they said it was quiet enjoyment that I was affecting, and they went in for a restraining order. Remember, that was the initial argument.
right, and we got an agreement in that, which is interesting because they then tried to bring it up later.
Right,
And
exactly.
the real person who needed a restraining order was her to be able to have somebody go in. So that was also an interesting part of it, was that I mean, it's just amazing how people can lie. Like I said, lie, cheat, and steal, lie, cheat, and steal. It's just unbelievable what people get away with. I don't know why there can't be a level playing field, because as I was talking with my close friend Stuart Schreier the other day, and he said, Jordana, we are not Avalon. We do not represent Avalon. And the fact that, and that's a real thing. I understand Avalon has investors and they have to report to people about their money. People like Aletta Horton, people like Lydia Capri, they're human beings. They're all they have. They have families. They have children. They have their own problems.
Avalon being the huge corporation that has property all over the place in multiple states, so on,
Yes.
so forth. Right,
Yes.
versus the small business owner. Very
Yes.
different picture. Aletta, I mean, I know it's very clear that you're a positive, optimistic person, a very graceful, elegant person who has a lot of composure. But I'm just curious, when all this was playing out, were there moments where you just felt like screaming out the window? I mean, how when these accusations, well, when these tactics started rolling out from the other side, these accusations about
Mhm.
discrimination and retaliation, how did you feel? Were you ever overwhelmed, or did you just go straight to the thought that, okay, this is how it works and I'm ready. I'm going to be patient and I'm going to wait it out. I mean, what was going through your mind when all this was playing out in real time?
Well, first of all, I didn't have any choice but to be patient and wait it out. So whether I wanted to or not, that wasn't an option. But with this whole thing, because I'll just tell you, I've never purchased a property with tenants in it before. They were my first time.
Hmm.
And I knew it was a family. And before I even started, I'm a praying woman. And God let me know, whatever you do, I have to get the glory out of whatever you do. So that was always at the front of my mind. Cussing somebody out, will God get the glory out of that? Of course not. Doing something underhanded, will he get the glory out of that? Of course not. So the times that I maybe got frustrated were I wanted Jordana to do things, and she would say, "That's not going to make a difference. I don't care. Do it anyways. It'll make me feel better." But like when they called housing, I had a list of chores that I had to get, well, things I had to do. There was a door off of the hinges. There were a few can lights hanging from. I'm thinking, but I didn't do that. But it was all about aggravating me and trying to show that the house was in disrepair. So I hired someone that went to the home, and I was even then still trying to be gracious. And there were some areas on the wall where the paint had peeled off or whatever. And I very nicely asked Mrs. Washington, can I send somebody in there to get some of the paint to do a paint match? And instead of just saying yes, she got sarcastic. Well, weren't you already in here? I said, you know what? Never mind. Because I was told by housing I can paint my house whatever color I wanted to. I said, let me look up the medicinal properties of lime green. And there are some. So I got a nice neon green, and my painter showed up at the house to make the repairs and paint. And when she saw the color paint he was going to use, she called the police on him. She called the police to keep him from painting. The police, my maintenance person called me on the phone, and the police told him, you can't paint. Tenant does not want you to paint. She goes, but you can fix everything else. So I said, no, if he's not going to paint, he's not going to do anything. So she runs down to Home Depot, gets the same color paint, has her husband paint it, and then is emailing myself and goodness, the housing inspector, Mrs. Golden, was wonderful, but told her, oh, she can do everything else. But I said, no, I'm going to do everything or nothing, because if I don't paint, you will use that against me in court and say that I didn't do all that I was supposed to do. So in the midst of that, when she filed the false police report, I was so frustrated, I called down to give my version of the story. Serena said, none of that matters. I said, I know, but I don't want it to be on record that I'm trying to poison someone. That's a bold-faced lie. So most of my frustration, besides the system, which I think is horribly unfair, was Mrs. Washington's actions. Her actions blew me away. I mean, there is a scripture that talks about the wicked lying on their bed trying to devise evil. That was her. She would just do things that blew, I mean, the fake email, the false police report, all of that. And so that was the most frustrating part for me, was the kind of person that I was dealing with.
I see. Jordana, I know eventually the court wasn't accepting the tenant's position with regard to the property being in disrepair and the excuses. But in more general terms, if, let's say, a tenant causes damage and says there's a crack on the wall or the door isn't securely on the hinge, and let's say the property owner has that repaired during the course of the eviction process, can the tenant then come and say, oh, I didn't notice this, but there's also a crack on the window? I mean, can the list of things keep going on and on and on after the eviction proceeding has begun? Or is it just a matter of praying that the judge will eventually get what's going on and put an end to it?
The latter. I mean, technically, you're not supposed to technically be able to bring up stuff that happened after the date that you were served with the notice to quit. But this is one of the problems with the system, is that there are rules that are in place with no, they're really, they might as well not be in place. Because it's, not going anywhere.
Right, right. And you mentioned yourself too in previous episodes. It's one thing if you have issues with the essential stuff like plumbing, electric, but every property is going to have something or some things that are not perfect, little flaws here and there. But should the owner really be held accountable for those little things, especially in the context of this situation where the bigger goal is to remove people who are intentionally non-compliant?
Right. Yes, it
Yes.
is. But what's paid attention to, and again, I've said it before, is that there's this sort of feeling, I don't know if it's the governor, I don't know who, that they sit there and they think, oh, everybody's going to be homeless, and they see this really nasty picture in their head, and they don't see any part of what could happen to the owner.
Right.
It's
Because
like it's not even of moment.
the owner is not seen as a human being who's vulnerable,
Right. Right.
unfortunately. How long, if you could kindly remind me, how long did it take from the beginning of this case to the time when you got the judgment in your favor?
I served the notice to quit January 2023, and we got the decision May 15th, 2024.
Wow, wow. So that's about a year and a half?
Yeah.
A year and a half too long, right, Aletta?
Yes, and I just wanted to add too, that they did add on some issues. So when Mrs. Golding went out the first time, they had a list, and she was telling me how she was trying to get her to mark everything. And Mrs. Golding said, "Ma'am, that's wear and tear. Ma'am, that's normal wear and tear." But after I made the first set of repairs and Mrs. Golding went back out, she added more to the list, including saying all the screens on the windows were gone. And I asked Mrs. Washington repeatedly, what happened to all the screens? They fell off during a storm, this happened, that happened, and then she just wouldn't even answer. Well, during my one inspection of the property, guess where I saw some of the screens? In the attic. In the attic. And I thought to myself, horrible. Like, you lied to the housing inspector. You know where the screens are. They're up here in your attic. So she tried to find things for me to have to do. So yeah, they can add on things after the fact because she did.
And you can't put a camera in the place to watch them. You can put a security camera facing away from the building, in a common area. But I mean, I'm only bringing that up just to illustrate how difficult it is, or how difficult it can be to prove that a tenant is intentionally manipulating a situation, causing the damage, just to prolong these types of situations. Whereas their time would be better spent just finding another place they can go. Jordana, we were previously talking about legislative solutions, legislative reform, going to the legislature to educate them, which is still on the table. But I heard from somebody the other day who was asking whether or not property owners could go to a higher court to petition for reform as it pertains to the eviction process, whether that be the Massachusetts High Court or even the Supreme Court, to try to make some changes in the way that various states treat the eviction process to make things more balanced. Do you have any thoughts about that? Is that even possible?
I don't know, because I feel like I've been screaming and yelling for 17 years. And there was a bench bar yesterday, which is the opportunity for the judges and the litigants to get together, and they're supposed to ask questions and comment. And I couldn't go because I had a doctor's appointment, but I wrote a letter in about, essentially saying it's due process dead for landlords, because, tenants can file their answer late, but landlords, if you're supposed to file on a Monday, if you file at 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday, you can get dismissed. There's just no end to the unfairness. And, can we do something? And the clerk wrote back, keep doing what you're doing. You do a great job. I had a case recently. Well, I didn't have a case. I wasn't the trial lawyer. The landlord had lost at the trial, but I went back to try to open up the case and undo it, because he had found out that the tenant actually was not who she said she was. And the court said, well, he took money from her. She's his tenant. We don't care that she committed fraud. So I don't know. It's scary. And evictions have always been hard, as they should be. Taking away somebody's home is a big deal. At the same time, I will never comprehend how contracts, they just have no weight. You sign a lease with somebody for 1 year, and at the end, they're allowed to say, we don't have to leave. The law in this state says we don't have to. So we're not going to, because we don't have to. It's absolutely, it's so upsetting. What it would take, I think, to have any change is a lot of landlords banding together and saying, we're not going to take it anymore, and losing cases and appealing them and keeping going until something changes, which is what tenants have done, and which is why we have a lot of the laws that we have, because legal services organizations, who are essentially paid by the state to do their job, have the bandwidth. They have, hundreds of people that work for them that can do research and file briefs and do all this and that and get things changed. Landlords just say, you know what, I just want to move on to the next thing, because I don't want to focus on this anymore. It was too emotional. It was too hard. And they just give up. I will say that because Aletta was kind, it took longer than it should have, because if she had never agreed to make them her tenants, they would not have had those rights due to being foreclosed owners.
I see.
But it was too late. By the time she took the first payment for rent, it was too late.
So there are times when kindness can definitely kill you, but then if you rush into the eviction process, folks on the other side can also accuse you of being greedy, but they're going to accuse you of a whole lot anyway, right? It's a no-win, no-win situation. My
Right.
goodness. My
Yes.
goodness.
Yes, absolutely.
You
So
know,
let
Amir,
go
it's
ahead.
funny that I was going to say that towards the end, Mrs. Washington had the nerve to try to tell the judge that I wouldn't sell them the property, although I had agreed to. And I'm like, woman, you all said, I have an email where your husband says you no longer want to buy the property. So I just thought it was interesting that she's trying to now buy the property and say that I won't sell it to them. But one other thing too that I thought was very unfortunate is, as a loan officer, we require investors to have 6 months of reserves when they buy a property, because it's assumed that whatever is happening with your property, you should be able to have it under control within 6 months. And so in Massachusetts, I would say for landlords, you have to have at least a year of reserves, because the judge even knew that I had a balloon payment due, and that didn't sway him one way or the other. In fact, one would almost think that that he was intentional in his dragging things along for as long as he did. It was really disgusting. It was horrible.
They
It's
have
horrible.
120 days to come up with a decision, but that's the
It
only
should
benefit
take
of a
4
jury
months.
trial, but it's just yucky.
Right, but it shouldn't take 4 months to decide if someone should have to pay rent or
No,
not. That's not a 4 month thought. You know what
no.
I'm saying? That's what things that he was deliberating on, to me, could have been made, a decision made on the spot.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
If
Absolutely.
you're in business, the Bible says, in business, be men. And so you cannot let emotions play a role in your business dealings. It's probably the biggest thing. I always knew that, but I let my emotions just deter me from taking action I should have taken from the beginning, because they actually did things from the beginning to show me that they weren't going to be upright, but I still gave them the benefit of the doubt.
hmm And going forward, Alita, with regard to your plans for the future, I mean, emotions might be kind of raw right now, just given recent events, but do you see yourself continuing to be a rental housing provider in the future?
Well, I still am, and I will still invest in Massachusetts, but I probably won't rent, just because it's it's too lopsided in the favor of the tenant. And these people, they have shown me that it doesn't matter how sweet you talk, how nice you come across, if you claim you're a Christian, at the end of the day, you just don't know who you're dealing with. And I don't want to deal with this again.
Well,
Anybody
just
who knows how to use mass courts, you can read more. The docket number is 23 H84 SP 001338, and it is now open to the public completely. So while only lawyers used to be able to see certain things, you can see everything. Everybody can see everything now.
With this eviction stealing, is this going to go away for them, Jordana? Is this going to disappear for them
They
with
can
the eviction
apply
stealing
for it
now?
to they can apply for it to disappear, but they owe money, so that part can't go away.
Okay. Okay.
and
Thank
if I'm
you.
correct, if they do apply for that, Alita has the right to be there and to voice per se. Is
Yeah,
that
and I
correct?
think we talked about this at the last thing, that it's
Yeah.
gonna, unfortunately, I think it's gonna be similar to when a tenant files any other motion. They don't send us a copy, so we don't know that we can defend it because we don't know about it.
Well, thank you for that docket number that you provided. I think it's great that the public can go and read these things on their own, because that's one of the most effective ways for people to learn and to open their eyes, so that we can hopefully fix this problem for everybody in Aleta's position. So I thank you both for joining us today. It was a great conversation. Have a good day,
Thank
everybody.
you.